Welcome to In This Moment. I'm Janet Stovall, DEI strategist, joined by organizational culture expert Khalil Smith. We tackle the urgent questions in management and inclusion, exploring what's next and what you can do about it today. We're so glad you're here with us. Let's dive in. So welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about how organizations can harness data to create better workplaces across diverse countries. Khalil's been on my case very much about the fact that we need to stay global, so we're going to do that today. And here's what we know. 96% of company executives say their organizations could improve how they actually use data. And a third of them report they're unable to make sound decisions based on data due to distrust, lack of skills, or insufficient data.
And here's the bigger issue. 54% of senior business leaders feel unprepared to navigate rapid advances such as AI. And AI is all around us, right? That includes deploying data strategically for organizational advantage. Organizations know they need better data, but they don't trust what they have. And leaders feel unprepared for the technology that could help them.
And with pressures mounting over the next 24 months, which is what we're all about, from accelerating digital transformation to shifting workforce expectations, it's clear that leaders have got to move beyond intuition. Precision, measurement, and data fluency are no longer optional. They're essential for creating lasting impact. So today, we're talking with Pam Jeffords. She's a transformational leader and a global thought leader known for her bold yet practical approach to building inclusive workplace cultures. As a managing partner for BE Labs, Pam advises organizations across industries on how to align people and culture strategies with business outcomes.
And with more than 3 decades of experience partnering with Fortune 500 companies, universities, and nonprofits, Pam challenges organizations to rethink traditional approaches. She categorizes practices into 3 critical lenses. First is common practices disguised as best practices. Second is proven practices tied to business results. And third is promising practices that are emerging in today's polarized environment.
And she's uniquely suited to do this because she previously led Mercer's global DEIB consulting practice, and she was a partner at PwC in the Workforce of the Future team. Her work has been featured in Fortune magazine, The Economist, and through collaborations with the World Economic Forum.
Because here's the thing, when 96% of executives know they need better data, but a third can't make sound decisions with what they have, you need someone who can bridge that gap. And fortunately, we have that someone. So please, we are excited to have this conversation with Pam.
Pam, we are thrilled to have you with us today. So let's just jump right in. And we're going to first talk about what's next. So over the next 24 months, how do you see global data collection evolving? What should organizations expect? And is there a role for data in advancing inclusion at all?
Yes. Well, I think we're going to see a little bit of a calmer approach to it. Since March, there's definitely been almost like a stop of, we can't collect data, we can't look at this information. So now it's starting to become normalized again. I think what you're also going to start to see is more self-ID rather than a traditional method of maybe feeding the data, a lot of data through your HRIS, especially when it comes to employee surveys. A lot of companies take a good bit of the demographic data of a person and then have them append anything they want. And what we're seeing right now is across the world, we're seeing an epidemic of mistrust. And so if employees feel like you know who they are, then they're not going to answer as authentically. So when it comes to any type of questions that you're asking your employee or collecting data, it does need to be anonymous and let them self-select what they want to share with you in terms of their role, their department, or individual dimensions of identity. And if you do that, then globally, you're not restricted from asking things like you are if you're using your HRIS as the backbone for a good portion of this data. And we're seeing about 10% of people, I prefer not to share dimensions of their corporate and personal identity. So about 10% of the people, you know how they feel, but you don't know who they are. So that's where we're seeing it going, is globally allowing that self-identification. Don't connect it to your HRIS. There's tools out there now that don't even attach someone's answers to an IP address. So it truly can be anonymous and not just confidential. When you see that, we see the answers and the responses and the insights going way up, and people are more ready to share information with you. We're also seeing live data collection, like more online focus groups using technology to where You're giving context behind the questions you're asking your employees as opposed to a static survey where they don't really, well, why are you asking me this? And then what are you doing with the data? And so we've been, for the last few years, looking at live data collection where they're answering the questions, but the business leaders are on a Zoom call or a Teams call. And they're saying, this next question I want to ask you is because, and they explain why they want to ask the question. And then they push the question to them. And then the employees answer. And then real time, the business leader can go, wow, that was interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Let me ask a different question. Or, hey, this is great. Let's move on. And so it's real time collection of employee insights, of employee data. And that's where we're going. We don't need the static survey any longer. We need real live town hall vibe feels to data collection. And it's just possible now. It wasn't possible years ago. And now with all these great platforms out there, you can do live conversations where you're collecting the data at the same time.
Let me ask a question for that then. So what does that mean for, I'm the kind of person who believes, I'm working on my next book, and one of the characters in there is called a disaggregationist. I believe you have to know what the data is. You have to disaggregate it so that you can actually move forward with inclusion processes and initiatives. You got to know who you need to serve. What happens then if we can't disaggregate the data? What does that mean for the future of inclusion initiatives?
Well, I hope we don't get there, and we're not yet, right? So we can still disaggregate the data. We can still ask dimensions of identity and look at it for purposes of equity. So if we look at in other countries, the rules around data collection have always been stronger than they have been in the United States. And one of the caveats to collecting data and disaggregating it by dimensions of identity has been, if you're doing it in order to prove or to uncover any inequities in employees' experiences, then that's okay. And that should have always been it. To collect data just to collect it is not helpful. And so a lot of countries have that clause in there that you can't just collect it to collect it. You need to say, what are you doing with it? And are you trying to uncover any inequities? So I don't see us getting to the point where we can't disaggregate it, and we should. And the cool thing about some of these new tools that are out there is you can actually look at it real time. Let's say I ask a question that says, are you receiving feedback from your manager? Overall, let's say that on average, 70% of people say yes. The tools that are out there now actually allow you to look at it by demographic group. And you can see, actually, my people over 50 are saying, no, they're not getting feedback. My Hispanic employees or my indigenous people or my people from a particular country in Europe are saying no. The tools actually highlight that for you. And they say, wait, hold on. This population here, as long as it's over 5 people, is saying no. So real time, you can say, wait, hold on. 70% of you said yes, but there's a good piece of you down here that are saying no. So I want to hear more from you. So not only do I think we're still going to disaggregate the data, I think we're going to be able to do it real time, which is, again, fascinating, and it gets to inclusion, and it helps those smaller voices that maybe aren't large from a population standpoint or were historically marginalized or disadvantaged actually have as much of a voice as other folks. So I think we're going to get better with technology.
Pam, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the trust element that you were just talking about, because you and Janet were talking about, as trust is abating in some instances and as folks start to lean in, I'd love to talk a little bit about what the future of that is, and how organizations can build the trust so that people do feel comfortable disclosing.
Yeah. Yes, it's a great question, and I'm a huge fan of Edelman's Trust Barometer, and I've been watching it for years. And so when you look at how trust is eroding, and we kind of have this epidemic of mistrust that started well before the pandemic, what you saw through the pandemic is corporations and your companies really started to emerge as one of the most trusted institution, and actually the trusted institution for many people around the world. And then when COVID, it actually secured their trust more because most companies stood up in a good way and big way and communicated every day and helped you understand what to do and what was going on. And it was kind of your source of truth. And that trust stayed with your company well past the pandemic. The problem is that a lot of leaders aren't understanding what that trust means. And so when employees start asking, like, I actually want to know my leaders a little bit better. I want to know them authentically. I want to understand what their what vacation they went on and what they're doing. A lot of leaders were like, why do you want to know that? I mean, I'm here for shareholder value. I'm here to create jobs. I'm here to run the business. Why do you care what I did on a holiday this summer? And what they're missing, those leaders, is because you're building trust and they want to hear this from you. And some leaders are leaning into it and saying, well, that's not what I signed up for, but all right. Other leaders are like, I'm going to talk to them about the where the business is going and the vision. They don't need to know what's going on. And they're missing a big opportunity, because if you look at how people develop trust, we've talked about this for years, which is some people it's the head, some people it's the heart, some it's the gut, some it's the wallet. It's very, I trust you when. I trust you when you do what you say you're going to do. Or I trust you when I know I believe what you're saying. I have a relationship with you, or you've shown me some data. There's a variety of reasons people trust you. And so as leaders now, you have to hit all of them. You have to hit the head, the heart, the wallet, the gut in your communications. Some people want to know what's going on with you. Who are you? Who is this person that I'm trusting to keep me employed and that I'm following and the vision they're setting. So I do think companies are hearing about trust more, but they're misunderstanding that I want to trust you as a person. And those are connected. And so I encourage people to read the Trust Barometer. It's fascinating. And it will help leaders understand if you ask a group of employees, what's one question you want to ask your CEO today? Yeah. It's stunning how much of it is like, what's your favorite color? What's your golf
that
handicap?
That seems so easy, Pam. It's like, I can do that. You don't want to know about that strategy? I can tell you my favorite color and where I'm going on holiday.
Team more productive, whatever creates a high performing team. And if that is that they know that I just caught a fish last weekend, or I have a grandchild, or I got my golf handicap down, whatever it is. And again, those leaders that are fascinated by it and say, wow, I'm just starting to make sourdough, so I'm going to share that on my next town hall. And they're leaning into it and realizing that is developing trust. Trust leads to productivity and engagement. Let's not go, you're right, it's easy. Let's not go overboard overthinking. Why do they want to know this stuff? It's like, they do, and they're happier, and let's just give it to them. So I'm a huge fan of looking at trust and what do they need to develop trust with you? And oftentimes it's not all business.
I want to kind of marry. Oh, go ahead, Janet.
I was going to say, it's interesting you say that. I was talking to a leader one day, and what she said was, I did that. I was doing an event, and they asked me, talk about what are your hobbies. And she had a hobby that happens to be something that you have to be pretty wealthy to do. And what she found out was she should have said another hobby, because the pushback she got was everybody's like, oh, well, you must be privileged. And so I would say, that I can understand why they'd be a little afraid. But she even said, she goes, okay, so now I know that if people ask me a general question, I need to be cognizant of how I answer it. Be honest and be authentic, but keep in mind who I'm talking to and the position I'm in, and make sure that I answer in a way that they get insight, but they don't get the wrong insight. And I just thought it was funny that happened.
And it's so true because, when we talk about storytelling, and I'm a big storyteller, I'm 5 generations from Louisiana, like we tell stories, right? And so I've often told this story about why I love my job, but why my job is hard. And so I fly a lot, like a lot of consultants do. And so I get upgraded a good bit. And so one time my husband and I were flying together, and we were actually going to a funeral, and he didn't want to wear a suit in the plane. He wore jeans, baseball cap, and a shirt. But I went ahead and wore my funeral clothes. So I was in a black dress, heels. I was looking professional. And so I got upgraded, and he didn't, but he had a great seat. And so we said goodbye at the first class. It was good. Have a good flight. And when I sat down, the flight attendant said, wow, your husband's so nice to give you his upgrade. And so you kind of sit down and you're like, from a context perspective, I sat in the seat. So that should have been her first clue, it was mine. Second, I was dressed business. He was dressed like a, vacationer, right? And so it would have been so easy for me to say nothing, because I really wanted drinks, and knew if you're nice to them, they give you more drinks. And I was ready for my drink. I was ready for my Prosecco. And then she doubled down on it, because when I said, well, actually, this is my seat. And she's like, oh, wow, you're 1K. And And so then she goes to my husband, goes, wow, your wife travels a lot. That must be hard. What can I get you from first class? We've got some hamburgers up there. And my husband's like, what do you got on tap? I mean,
come on. I tried to give you an out and you wouldn't take it on here.
That would never happen to you, right? That would never happen to you if that were flipped.
Exactly. And so my husband's back there and he's not at all. But I was like, and you could tell it's United because I said 1K, but I was like, okay, United, epic fail, right? And they said, and the response was, when I told them about this bias, and the response was, well, we're so sorry you were disadvantaged. And I was like, I wasn't disadvantaged. My husband wasn't disadvantaged. He got a beer and a hamburger. He's like happy. I'm happy. I got my Prosecco. But they couldn't understand like why I was sharing the story because the outcome was not bad. And I said, well, if not me, who? This is like literally my job. And it was kind of this back and forth. And they didn't really get that I wasn't mad at all. I was not disadvantaged. I was not hurt. No one was hurt in the process. I just wanted to share that there was this bias happening and had there been a child. And so my story for sharing this with like audiences is I really didn't want to say anything. It was not exciting to say anything. I really was risking my drink because maybe she would get mad at me. But the only takeaway for this, Janet, was the feedback I got on that story was, wow, so you were drinking Prosecco on a flight. And I'm like, is that what you took away from this? And so now when I tell the story, I no longer say, I wanted my Prosecco for a 4-hour flight because that was kind of an elitist word or drink. And so I just say now I wanted to make sure that I got a drink and I don't use the word Prosecco and I've not yet had a complaint about that story again. And so to your point, Jen, it's like the storytelling is so interesting because you're trying to point it out, but the fixation of me saying the word Prosecco was so snotty and obnoxious that it lost the whole point of the story. As soon as I took out the fact that I was just wanted a drink and a cocktail on the plane, my story was awesome again. So I hear you.
You should ask for a bud.
Here's part of my concern, though, and we got a lot of other things to get to, so I want to get there. But, one of the big things, Janet, that you and I have talked about so much is to not get lost in the buzzwords and to not get lost in the really minor details and to see the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish. And there's a part of me that struggles with the idea that somebody sharing their hobby, which might be rowing or cricket or water polo or whatever, all of a sudden is not okay. And it's not surprising that we have leaders that say, well, if I'm going to get in trouble for authentically sharing what I like, or the fact that I'm taking my family to Italy instead of, down the street, I just won't share, right? If the bar is that high that I need to say it in the right way, with the right tone and the right thing, it's just easier to opt out. And I think we see that sometimes. And I think, Pam, your story is a great one. You're like, hey, here's this great example, well, congratulations on being 1K. Congratulations on your Prosecco. Right. And it's like, no, take a step back. And how do we all start to do more of that? So I know there's a bunch of other things to get to, but I think it's such a brilliant point because part of what you're talking about is the filtering and the code switching that we've all said we want to stop doing, right? And we need to be able to create that environment where all of us can say, hey, tell me that story and what do you want me to take away from that? Because maybe I don't quite get it right out of the gate, but being a bit curious can help to disarm some of that.
Right. And I think it gets us to why are we where we are now, right? Why when there was an opportunity and a door open for people to push back on diversity, equity, and inclusion, why did so many people take it? And why did so many people just like, hey, get rid of DEI? And it's because of those moments where we weren't able to be authentic and people weren't able to be authentic without getting hit hard. And that's where you start to have people just shut down and say, well, I'm not going to share anything anymore. And I'm not going to say anything anymore. And I shared that story to say, I really at that moment didn't want to address her bias. But if not me, who? And it's hard. Right. And it's reminding people that this work is not easy. It's very hard. And it comes like there's a reason why my background here is so plain, is the amount of feedback I get as a white woman in this space doing this work about my pictures of my family. Because I am very proud. I have 4 kids, a husband I enjoy hanging out with, a granddaughter, and another one on the way. I have like right to my left of me, I have this amazing picture wall that I love. But every time it's in the back of my camera, it does not matter the words coming out of my mouth about how passionate I am about equity, how I'm a data-driven person, that I'm going to look at any population and see and uncover any gap in experience someone might have. I'll be spouting off research and everything, and somebody will go, oh, look at your white kids in the background. Why are you up here talking about this work? So I have stripped out any pictures. You're not going to find them on here, because focus on whatever it is. I want you to focus on the research, the words, the work that we're trying to do. And we call them derailers. Like, there's certain phrases and things that are derailers, and it hurts when you hear them, because you're like, you have to be kidding me. I can't say that. I can't show pictures of my kids in the background. But at the end of the day, from a change management standpoint, if it's a derailer, I'm going to take off my personal, issues with, and I'm going to say, great, I'm not going to have pictures anymore. I'm going to not say Prosecco, and I'm just going to say a drink. So I've got my list of derailers, but I honestly believe, though, that is why we're sitting here continuing to have to defend the work. Is it got so hard, even for those of us that really truly were doing the work well and doing it right. It was exhausting. It still is exhausting. And we do have to figure out, how do we just take all the noise out of it. But I do think the constant pointing out of everything that we say was part of why the work was challenged.
And I know, Khalil, you told me, you're right, we got so much more stuff to get to. However, when I hear that, what I hear is, but then how do you get to be authentic? How is it fair that you can't show your kids? I mean, we talk, another example of that often is when, for example, people of color try to sell houses. When I sell my house, I have a house full of art. I'm going to take all that art down because it's all Black artists. And so, and it's sort of the same thing. So the question is, how do we manage to show up authentically, but to have, when we have to be concerned about how people are going to take things? I mean, I think, first of all, I will say to you that I think it is wonderful that you did that, because I agree with you. That's a derailer. And what you're doing is you're prioritizing the work there. And I mean, it's not going to hurt your kids if they're not on camera. I know that. So I know there is a continuum of what you let go of, but that could not have felt good for you. It wouldn't feel good for me if that's what I wanted. I'm not taking my African mask out, so I just think that it is, I don't know that we're going to solve it. I don't even know where we take it from here, but that's just an interesting.
It is. And Janet, I think the question for so many of us, definitely for me, is, are we lowering the bar for everyone or raising the bar for everyone? And so is the question, well, if Khalil can't show his children in the background or talk about what he does on the weekend, then nobody should be able to do that. Or should the better conversation be, if that CEO, senior leader that is making $5, $10, $20 million a year can talk about, yeah, I'm taking my family on my private jet and we're going to go do this. Are they rubbing it in, or are they just saying, like, this is what we're going to do? And I may at the same time say, oh, my family and I are going to visit my parents down in Georgia. And so I think that's part of the question, is folks have felt like, well, we're lowering the bar for everyone, so now we just all shouldn't talk about those things, because this group has to code switch, and this group has to hide, and this group has to mitigate the biases, and this group has to be more aware of the derailers. Or are we raising that ceiling for everybody and saying, yeah, we should all be able to wear our hair however we want. Yeah, right. We should all be able to wear the top that we want to wear to work. Yeah, we should all be judged by the quality of the work that we're doing. And Pam, this is why I love so much of what you're doing, because you're talking about the data. You're talking about the research. You're talking about the examples. You're bringing these things to life and bringing them forward. And so I do want to ask you a follow-up to that, because what you were talking about with Janet, both in this conversation and before, was around the data. So as we still think about kind of what comes next, I don't think we can have any conversation that doesn't include artificial intelligence. I feel like I'm going to trade in my paycheck and just get $1 every time I hear AI, and I think I will work out far better. But where over the next 24 months do you see things like bias detection and AI? Where is that technology headed? What is becoming possible in that space?
I love it. I love AI. And that's another one where, you talk about AI and everybody's like, if you're not in AI, then you're behind. And then you get hit hard because AI's an environmental risk because of the heat from the servers. And my partners and I are always talking about, we can't win. Like if you talk about AI, you might get hit down from environmental. But I think where it's going and we're huge, huge fans and have been for a few years now, trying to stay ahead of AI. I know there's a group of people concerned that AI is going to perpetuate biases. And that's real, and that's the whole nother topic. It could, but what we look at is how can it actually interrupt the biases? And because let's be clear, we've been doing this work. I'm 58 years old. We started doing this work when I was starting my career back in the late 80s, right? And so when you look at the role of technology, it has always been to disrupt stagnant trends, right? That's the role that technology needs to play right now in the space of inclusion, because I think we've all agreed it's stagnant right now. So how do we disrupt it? And technology will, and I think it's going to be AI. So the couple of ways we're using it is when you have performance management data, and we all are aware of the biases that often show up in performance management data. And we could talk about halos and horns. We could talk about all kinds of biases, and we could teach people about the biases. But now if you can show it to them in their data, so you can take the 40,000 employee records and now download the performance management data, and then you ask your agents to look at if there's any biases by gender, by race, by ethnicity, by tenure, but you have to know what you're looking for. Right. So that's where agentic AI comes in, because I have a list of 10 things I'm going to look for, but the next person may not know to look for those 10 things. So when you can create agents that say, hey, here are the 10 things I want you to look for. So we look for things like word count, and word count is still at a very high level. It's still very much favoring the majority groups. And then you start to look at, and if you look at indigenous people, they're getting like 5 words, like great job, keep it up. Like you can just start from the basics, do a quick word count, and then get into the types of words that you're using. And so recently we did this, and we looked at director and above population. And this particular company had several hundred directors and above. And they were about a 50-50 split in women and men. And so we were looking to see, we knew there was a problem in workload and bandwidth. So we were looking to see if they were giving advice like delegation and things like that. And what we found was in the in the comments to the men, it was delegate, delegate, delegate. Here's how to delegate. Here's what you should delegate. And in the women's comments, it was, here's how you need to ask for help. And not one single time was the word delegate used in a woman's performance review and feedback. Not once out of hundreds. And it was used constantly with men. There is not a single leader that argued with me that those are the same things. So when you can show them that women are getting information that says you're not in control, you don't have power, you need to seek, like lead without authority kind of thing. And then the men are being told constantly, delegate, you have the authority. That's going to end up creating systemic issues where women are going to be left behind. Men are going to be promoted. Women are going to be doing it twice as much as men. But I had to show them the data, even though I can show you research from way back 20 years ago that said this was happening. Until you show them it's happening in your organization, and here's an example. And by the way, you only have to show them one example. As soon as you can show them,
this is your data.
Your data, here's your example, they're sold. But when you show them generic, hey, here's what happened at Starbucks 5 years ago when a barista called the police on the 2 black men sitting there, it's an interesting example of a bias.
It's too distant.
It's powerful. It's too distant. It's not relevant. And at the same time, what am I doing with that data? Nope, I'm not a barista. So you have to not only take these generic biases and distill them down into, is it happening in your organization? And then give them a real example of it. And then really the work gets so exciting from there, because I'm not convincing them anymore that they have biases. I'm just pointing them out. So then they're like, give me the next one, Pam. So now we've addressed the delegation. What's the next one? And I would say that 5 years ago, we could not have done that. And definitely not at the speed in which we could do it now and the cost we can do it. So when I did that particular exercise, I timed myself. And from the time the client gave me the data file of 40,000 employees, it was 4 hours for me to be able to tell them, hey, here's some things I'm seeing. And we just couldn't have done that. So one, it just doesn't make it faster or easier. It's just not even possible. And then now that we know, hey, there's this bias and it's in the way that we're using words, and we're describing what we want you to do, but not using the power words. Now we can create an agent that looks in performance management. So another example is a lot of companies want their leaders to have critical thinking skills. And we know that our emerging leaders don't have the critical thinking skills that we might have as later in career. And there's a whole nother reason of why we think that it's not as strong of a skill. So if we look at what is critical thinking, are you asking questions? Are you challenging assumptions? Are you getting a lot of input? Are you doing all this stuff? All those things, if they're describing them in the performance review, but they're not using the word critical thinking, then the agent can go back in and say, well, hey, clearly you just described critical thinking, so we're going to use that word. Pam does a great job at critical thinking. And now when they're looking to see who to promote and they're looking for someone with critical thinking, guess what's in my performance review? Critical thinking. And so that's where we're seeing it go is if you've got a list of 5 leadership competencies and you've got them described, if they're being described in any type of review, the agent can go in and replace and say, I'm seeing critical thinking. I'm seeing delegation. I'm seeing, innovation, whatever those are. And over time, people will start to attach these descriptions back to the leadership behaviors. But most HR leaders know they've got all these great leadership behaviors out there and they sit and they get dust and nobody ever looks at them again. How do you bring them alive? And I believe AI is going to allow us to, again, just talk in a normal tone. Tell me about Janet. Janet's great. Janet does this, but then it's listening to all my words. And then you've got your list of competencies here and saying, everything that I just vomited about how amazing Janet is, match it to these competencies and tell me which ones we just got. That's where it's going. And I love that, right? And so I do think from an inclusion standpoint, feedback, performance reviews are the biggest barriers to growth for certain populations because they're not getting feedback at all, or it's not quality, or it's not timely.
So what do we do? So if that's the possibility, that's where we could go. What should organizations be doing right now? That's the what's next. We're going to the what now. Well, what should they be doing right now with their data?
I would say right now they need to be understanding what the barriers are within the organization. And so what are the barriers to growth? So when we look at your internal labor market and not everybody's focused a lot on external labor market. How do I get more of this type of talent? I would say the first thing you need to do is figure out who's in your organization now and are they all experiencing your values the same way? And that's an easy assessment now. And then once you figure out that they're not, or they are, then you start to look at and say, all right, if it is, let's say it is feedback, because 9 times out of 10, feedback is where people get their development opportunities. They get praise, they get feedback, they get career growth. So if we bucket all that under feedback, if you can look and see, I have gaps here, and then I go and describe the behavior better, and then I hold people accountable for doing the behavior, whatever it is, that's what they could do now is where is their biggest opportunity? And is it in feedback? Is it in listening? Listening is another huge one that I have to convince leaders that they need to teach people how to listen. And they kind of laugh at me and they're like, Pam, honestly, if I have to teach somebody how to listen, that's just silly because I role model it every day. And I'll say to them, great. So talk to me about like listening. How do you role model listening? Well, I have a town hall once a month, once a quarter. I have an email box that says, ask me anything. But the big one, Pam, is I walk the halls. I listen to employees. I go to all my locations and I listen. I was like, great. So now I'm a first line manager and I have 10 direct reports and I'm sitting in an office. Do you want me to host a town hall? Well, no. Do I get an email address saying, ask me anything? No. If I walk the halls, nobody cares. Nobody's going to stop and talk to me when I walk the halls. And that's when they realize that how do you listen as a manager? Your CEO cannot role model and demonstrate that because it's a totally different listening. What does it mean? And then you can start to say, let's describe it. Well, what it means is if I walk into a room, I take my phone and I put it down because as soon as I turn my phone over and face it down, you now know I'm intentionally here to listen to you. If I make eye contact with you, it's the biggest form of I'm listening to you. If I repeat back what you're saying, all of those different cues as to how do you listen as an individual, not as a CEO, and you describe them and then you hold people accountable and then you ask the question. does your manager listen when you talk? And then if that's the behavior we're looking for, then I can measure that across all dimensions of identity and say 20% of people are always going to say, no, my manager doesn't listen to me. But I want it to be 20% across all demographic groups. I want 20% of your people of color to say they're not listening, 20% of your LGBTQ, 20% of your Asian diaspora, 20% of your people from Spain, from Canada. If one population pops and says, well, 80% of this population is saying, my manager doesn't listen to me, I'm going to go after and close that gap. So that's what I would say do now is figure out where your gaps in your experience are that are important behaviors that you want to make sure every one of your employees are experiencing these behaviors the same. Where is that gap? And then you can start to address it and measure it over time. And I could tell you what most companies' gaps have, but again, it goes back to that Starbucks example. I could tell you with probably great confidence based on your industry what your gaps might be, but your leaders are not going to believe it unless you show them it's happening right here. So I always tell them, you've got to go do the work, figure out where your gaps in experience are, figure out the 3, 4, 5 behaviors that you want consistently across your organization, and then measure the existence of those behaviors across every demographic group. And when it pops, let's go address it. And that is honestly a data-driven strategy. And most people don't really understand what a data-driven strategy is, but that's it. It's very simple. 3, 4, 5 behaviors, measure them. And when you see a gap, go and address it.
And simple doesn't mean easy, just to be clear. There's a lot to what you were just talking about. It may be straightforward, but there's a lot of effort, energy, resources, learning, being open and honest with yourself. And Pam, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how do you do this globally? Because I know you work with multinational and global organizations. Diversity may look different in different places and it's thought about differently. Those points that you raise about, whether it's eye contact or speaking back to a manager, whatever those things may be, are sometimes very cultural and contextual. You create consistent measurement across different legal and cultural systems.
Yes. And so that's kind of the beauty of bringing it down to behaviors, because we often say diversity is very local, but inclusion can be global. And so when we're looking at inclusion, and if we can bring everything that we're talking down to a behavior, then it really does cross across all cultures. Now, to your point though, like if you ask someone, are you getting good feedback? Depending culturally, they may not say they aren't because they've been conditioned to say yes to everything, like everything's great. So you do have to make sure it's anonymous and remind them, we actually want to make your manager better. So I just did a global focus group, and we use the term focus group instead of survey. And we did a focus group across the world. And if I asked them if their manager was giving them feedback, in some cultures they said yes, because again, it's culturally, you're just supposed to say your manager's amazing. But then I actually asked the question, hey, we've got some budget dollars for training. And if we were to put aside some training dollars for your manager, write the top 3 things that you would want to see your manager get training for. So we phrase it as an opportunity for their manager.
Reframe. It is.
And all of a sudden we got this, oh, well, my manager definitely needs some help.
Oh, they're great at feedback. Oh, we got some training dollars. Please feedback.
Give it to the feedback. But because if you have good companies, like they love their manager, right? And it does not matter what you ask about the manager when they love them, it's going to be yes, And so if you phrase it as, I want to upskill your manager, I want to give them more of a benefit, where should we do that? So that culturally, you're going to see a lot, because again, people are not going to complain about their manager in certain countries. Then in terms of the gaps, the data that you collect, you really do want to understand regionally the context. So in some countries, religion is more of a marginalized identity than, say, race might be, or gender. What country you're from. We know colorism is very big in South America. But if you would ask them about race, they say, oh, we're not racist, Pam. But then they would say, but I mean, if you're lighter skinned, you're definitely going to get promoted. And I'm like, that's not racism. And they'll actually say to me, Pam, do not bring your racist U.S. conversation down here. But definitely if you're lighter skinned, you get promoted. And they kind of like, it cracks you up because you're like, well, in the U.S., we call that racism. So you do have to get the terminology right, because if you don't, again, let's go back to that derailer word. And so if you don't understand, in certain countries, it's the caste system and they can't actually get out of it. And so if you come in and say, oh, there's no barrier you can't overcome with just, making sure that you do have a growth mindset, or that you set your intentions. It's like, no, if you're in this system, that is a barrier you cannot overcome, right? So understanding where you are. And I would also say try really hard not to be judgmental, which is very, very tough when we're seeing it across the world. And you see certain countries, when you ask, what could we do for your mental health? What could we do for your overall wellness? And you have one country saying, our yoga mats are really old and we really need them replaced. And then the same company in a country nearby, they're saying, well, I have to bike to work because we are not allowed to drive. And I keep getting hit by cars. So if you actually gave me a new bike helmet more than once every 3 years, and you gave me a new bike helmet every year, I'd really appreciate that, because I get hit going to work a lot on my bike. As a practitioner, you're having to say, not get upset with that person who wants the new yoga mat, because that's their reality. That's their reality. And but again, it's data driven, and the way that these tools now allow me to look at this and say, what is the priority for this country? What's the priority for this country? And I can actually tell my clients with great confidence, here is what's important for this country, for this country. And if you had tried to do that 5 years ago without AI and without the ability to look at this data so quickly and filter it, they would have said, just give me the top 5 themes, Pam, what's going on? And you would have missed that bike helmet, because that population of people would not have hit high. And bike helmet,
they're never going to exceed that threshold. They're always going to be in the super minority.
And somebody mentioned bike 25 times, but it was 25 times out of a population of 100. That's 25% of your people, versus 25 times out of a population of 40,000 would never hit their desk if you said, just give me the top 5 themes. And so now you could just literally ask your AI, give me the top 5 themes by country, by demographic group. And my demographic groups are gender, age, tenure, sexual orientation. I mean, you've just got so many demographic groups, but just give me the top 5 themes. And then I can tell it, here's the top 5 themes for the whole company. Show me the outliers. And now I've crunched the data even smaller, because some populations are flowing right along with the top 5 themes. So when I ask it, just tell me the outliers. Now I haven't given them, here's 75 countries and here's the top 5 themes per country. Instead, I give them, here's the top 5 themes for your company, and here are the outliers by country. And then they can consume that data. So I think that's also where we're getting is for several years, we had so much data, we were drowning in it. And now we can use AI to say, give me if you could only see 5 things, what would the 5 things be that I want my leaders to see? And again, it just wasn't possible. And now it is. So I think inclusion's going to be more straightforward. I wouldn't say easier, because you're right, but it's certainly more straightforward.
Well, I'll tell you what, Pam, those 5 generations of Louisiana storytellers are serving you well, because you are using the data to tell a story and to cut through some of the noise, to help leaders actually understand these are the things you should be paying attention to. These are the things that matter. And not that the rest of it doesn't, but let me help you see that in the context of this big world of data. And it's why folks that navigate the data well are both artists and scientists.
Well, we talk about a lot on this podcast about the value of talking about inclusion and equity and diversity as valuable to the bottom line, to actually put it in the context of the workplace. Well, that's exactly what this data is doing. I mean, it says this is what inclusion actually looks like. I am a big proponent for, you can't ask people to be inclusive if you haven't defined what inclusion means. And it means different things for different organizations. So yeah, I think the data is a huge part of making that happen. But let me ask you a question to kind of bring this down a level of granularity. This is what organizations can do. What can I do as an individual? I mean that this is the way the data is moving and the way I think it's going to move into the next 24 months, what's going to happen with AI. What do I as an individual, is there anything I can do right in this moment to make sure that as it moves that way, I benefit from it, I'm not hurt by it, And maybe if I believe that that's the right thing to do, that I can help advance that. What do we do on the individual level?
Well, I think if you're an there's a lot, and I would break it down again into what's your role. So one of the things we do is your role an individual contributor? Is your role a manager? Is it a leader? Is it the data person themselves? Right. And so if you're a person that's just a coworker and you want to support your coworkers, the first thing I would say is, and we talked a little bit about it, we actually call it, Khalil, you mentioned being authentic. We actually really push everybody to have some kind of authenticity allowance for people. And it's a big word to say, authenticity allowance. But the first is allow people to kind of be themselves. And it doesn't forgive anything, and it doesn't not hold them accountable for anything they may say or do, but allow them some grace to be authentic. And right now, I don't think there's that in this space of inclusion right now. We're all lacking a bit of grace of allowing people to be authentic. And so really picking what are your 5 things that you're going to stay firm on, and not asking everybody to do it your way, especially inclusion. I say the word guys probably way too much. And so, like I get hit with that a lot. And so I've tried now, I'm from the South, so I'll say y'all or what have you. But there's some people that's just rolling off their tongue and they can't get rid of it. And you have to prioritize and say, is that going to be what I hang my hat on? Like
Right.
in the scheme of the 5 words that I want to eradicate from our vocabulary, is guys it? And for some, it might be, right? And, but figuring that out, or is it, you know, I use the word growth mindset. I had somebody call me out on growth mindset the other day. And in my head, when they did, I just sat there and goes, wow, this is why we're sitting where we are right now, is if I'm going to be called out for using the word growth mindset, and I get the context for why it's a difficult word, because it does presume that there's nothing that you can't overcome if you just work hard. And there's a lot of people who have things they can't overcome by that. But that's, again, one of those where I think as individuals, we do need to allow people to just be authentic, and then hold space for, no, I'm not going to allow you to say this without you getting a little bit of snap back from me in those spaces. And then really, and I hesitated to say, like, assume positive intent, because I think that's what we told people all the time. And there's a lot of people that don't have positive intent. So we
Exactly.
also need to be careful of our words. Like, I don't ask people to assume positive intent because it could be harmful to you as a person. But can you allow people to be authentic in certain spaces? And that's very different, and understand what's just their authentic self. So that's, I guess, everybody. I would ask us to kind of bring down our desire to teach you something every time you're in the room with me. And I think that's where we are, especially with some of the earlier in career. They're coming in and they're telling the later in career, from a generation perspective, here's the 52 words you can't say anymore. I'd also like to eliminate the word can't, because it's about, I don't want to get on a call or have an interaction with somebody and hurt them. I don't want to hurt anyone. So I would rather you say to me, gosh, if you could avoid that word, it might hurt someone. And it's still my choice if I say it or not. But now that I know it might hurt you, I won't. But when we start to use this language where you can't say this anymore, that's also a derailer. People are like, I can say what I want to say. Well, here's what will happen if the implications if you're saying that. So I think that's what everyone can do. If you're a leader, really ask for the data and ask for it, and ask to have a conversation. Don't ever just let somebody send you the data, because there's so much in there. There's so many stories behind it. So sit back and say, let's walk through it together. What is this telling me? What should I be looking at? And we all need to sit down and say, here's what I would be looking at. And from this data, it's telling you something. And then let's go find out and build the story out a little bit more. And if you're the data person, and I'll speak directly to the data person, be curious. Don't just say, oh, hey, this particular population is leaving at 5 times the rate of everyone else. Let me just send that in a report along with the 5,000 other things your leaders are looking at. Call it out and say, hey, I want to put a meeting on the calendar because this population is leaving at 5 times the rate of everyone else. And let's have some hypothesis to why it's happening. As a data person, I can likely go back and prove or disprove your hypothesis based on our data, at least get some of the way there. And so as a data person, be curious. Don't just send data along. I'm not saying you have to have the answers, but at least highlight it for them and say, this is weird. What's happening here? So there's definitely a role for everyone right now, especially when it comes to data. The issue is going to be is that after March and after the climate has changed around this work, getting the data is very hard. And so you started to see them pull back on the data from people. And I understand. I always say that this data in the hands of your leaders is game changing. It's so powerful. I found so many leaders who are like, I had no idea this population was leaving at 5 times the rate. I want to understand why. So it's so powerful. But that same data in the hands of a plaintiff's attorney can be crushing for your firm. So with the data, you just can't blanket share it with everyone because you still have to, at the end of the day, be responsible to protecting your firm. But sit down with those leaders and walk them through the data and say, if I were you, I would be looking at this for your organization. And really thinking about it again from a leader by leader, which again, we couldn't do versus sales versus IVP if you're own the data, because otherwise it can, again, it's just overwhelming how much we have and tell that story.
Well,
Yeah, wow is it?
I've always had respect for data. Thank you for giving me even bigger respect for data. I'm firmly a disaggregationist now because I can figure out how to do it. So thank you so much for all of that. Well, Khalil, did you have
and
anything else that
it's
you
so
wanted to
fun.
ask? Or I think we
Yeah,
covered
I
all the
mean,
stuff
I
you
could
meant.
stay with Pam for the next couple hours, but I don't think
Yeah.
that's fair to her or to our listeners who have to, go back to work and do other things. Pam, thank you so much on behalf of the folks that are listening and watching and won't maybe have the opportunity to tell you that. I hope they reach out and tell you just how impactful this conversation has been for them. And I hope it's been half as valuable for them as it has been for me. I know I've watched Janet nodding her head. You've seen me bobbing up and down, and lots of really amazing nuggets, lots of really insightful thoughts, and just a tremendous conversation. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the manner in which you're doing it, because it's having an impact and it's blazing a path for a lot of us.
Yeah,
Well,
what he
I
said.
appreciate the opportunity to be on a podcast like this and continue to talk about it, because it helps me as well. Because I always say, if I have 30 minutes to convince somebody about this work, I've got them. But if I only have a minute, it's too much. So I love sharpening my stories and making sure, hey, what's impactful. So I absolutely appreciate being on here and would love to come back and wish you well for your second season.
Thanks so much, Pam. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, as always, it's wonderful to have these conversations, and our conversation with Pam was great. And let's talk a little bit about what we took away from that. We always do our 3 takeaways. So I'll lead it off with what kind of sat with me. And of course, as a diversity pragmatist and an objective person, what took away from me is that data drives decisions. You cannot manage what you do not measure. But if you measure the wrong thing, then that's worse than kind of like not measuring data at all. So you have to build data systems that actually inform better decisions.
Couldn't agree more. And Janet, one of the other ones that jumped out is that AI amplifies everything. AI doesn't eliminate bias, it amplifies whatever bias exists in your data. So you have to clean your data first, then use AI to detect patterns you couldn't see before.
Yeah, I use the term BIBO, bias in, bias out, and I believe that's the case. You really have to be careful. And so then now, and the third takeaway, which of course is near and dear to your heart, and sort of one of the focuses you've said is that global is important. Global, however, requires local. One size fits all just does not work globally. So you have to build flexible systems that adapt to local laws and cultures while maintaining consistent core metrics. So there we are for this episode, and we are looking forward to our next episode. Thanks so much, Pam. Thanks so much, Khalil, and we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us on In This Moment. Find today's resources at inthismoment.network and connect with us on LinkedIn. And if this was valuable, subscribe and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. It helps other leaders find us. Stay ready for what's next.